Hello, and welcome back here to week 5. This is going to be part 2 of the lecture, where I'm going to go through this practice exercise that's pretty much identical to the assignment that you're going to be doing here for week 5 for this class. All I've done is change some names and some numbers, and then the practice and the problem are nearly identical. So what we're going to be doing here, we'll go down to the instructions here. We're going to be completing this payroll register for these 3 employees. Then we're going to be doing the journal entries for the employees based on the register. And then finally determining what the calculations are for Form 941 and filling out that form, very similar to what we did a few weeks ago when we started looking at Form 941. We're just going to be redoing it, now adding in the federal withholdings part instead of me giving it to you, and then simply then re-going back through and figuring out how to get each month's liability for the back part of the Form 941. So we're going to look at these 3 employees. We're going to make it easier on us in that they're paid monthly. So we've got, I tell you what the state withholding is, percentage, 3.4%, we're assuming the Indiana rate. County withholding, we're going to assume 1.3%. We've got the 3 employees, and these allowances and married type are going to be critical to determine our federal withholdings. I tell you what the regular pay is on a monthly basis. That's going to be important to figure out what our as of November 30th, what our information should be. We've got to know that. We've got to know how much we've made so far, and then how much other items get taken out of their paycheck. Okay, so I'm going to close out this screen and pull up the payroll register. Sometimes you'll be given the prior information data, sometimes you won't. So I'm going to help you figure out how I got to this information, how I even got these first few columns. So this is payroll up through November 30th. I got the 3 employees, and it helps to keep them what their filing status is and how many allowances out here to the side for in the future. We're going to need that in just a little bit for our federal withholding calculations. So what I did at first is simply put down how much gross wages they have earned this year. So that has nothing to do with their any withholdings that they had back from the previous sheet when they had the 401k or medical premiums. So just bare bones gross wages. And all I did, and I would get in a habit when you are doing this, look at the equation I have put into the box to help to calculate this. This will really help when I'm going through, and if you have missed something, I can easily see where you've missed it by just looking at your formula. And I mean, the other way, of course, would be to type it into a calculator and then just enter in your digits. But this way, it calculates it right here in Excel. And I'll show you elsewhere that becomes more important as well. Federal wages today. What I did for that. What I did is I determined, okay, what is our monthly taxable wages for federal insurance, for federal purposes? So I took the gross pay, which was $11,800, and then I subtracted out. Remember, for federal, we can subtract out any retirement monies, medical premiums, or any of those other items that we've previously covered. So if I take $11,800 and subtract out $450, and then subtract out $300, I'm left here with this $11,050 taxable federal wages every month, assuming nothing changes with my pay. So I can simply just multiply that by the last 11 months, which tells me how much I've made thus far for federal purposes. Now for FICA purposes, total wages. Remember, everything's the same except I cannot take out the federal, the retirement monies like I did for federal. So therefore, I just have the 11,800 gross minus the medical of 300. So that's where I got the 11,500 times the 11 months. Now I can, and I think I have this set up already in your template that I've provided to you, but it's good to have a good total column down here as well. And as you can see with the formula, all I did is add up this column right here. Now we're going to do just this payroll. How much money have we earned just for the month of December? And this is basically just using what we just did, using those same numbers. So instead of doing it times 11, the 11,050, just put 11,050 here. Same all the way down. The only difference is I'm going to break up this FICA column into two columns, Social Security and Medicare. So I had 126.5 for all my previous FICA wages. That puts me over the Social Security cap. So therefore, nothing is left to be taxed when I'm calculating Social Security. However, for Medicare, since it has no cap, I'm going to use the same wages that I would have normally used for FICA. So I look back at the FICA and I remember that, oh yeah, it was 11,500 is taxable. So that's what I'm going to use when I'm doing the FICA, for the Medicare part of FICA. I look down to the next person. They almost have hit the cap of 118.5. If they simply added another $800, they're going to be at the cap. So that's where I've got to stop it. They can only be taxed up to another $800. However, the full amount is taxable for Medicare, $10,700. Our final employee is nowhere near the cap. Therefore, all of his wages are not only taxed for Medicare, but also for Social Security. So now I've got a good base to start with. Now I can start calculating my federal withholdings. The easiest person to do it for is our final employee. Our final employee is, of course, we're doing monthly payroll. And for this Melissa Moss, I want to look up somebody, let me go back, somebody who is married with 3 allowances. So in the back of the payroll book, I look for the monthly, and then somebody who's married with 3 allowances with taxable federal wages of $53.30. And when you look that up, you should get, let's pull it over, there we go. You should get $472. It should show $472 should be withheld from that individual's paycheck. Now it's when we get to the other 2 individuals that if you'll look at the chart in that same area, they don't go nearly this high. They don't go up in the 10,000 range. So we have to do those the long method. And let's look at Lori's, the calculation I did for Lori. Okay. The first thing we have to do is find her, and by the chart, we need to subtract out her allowances because it'll say up there when we look at the beginning, the very front part of the payroll in that section, the very beginning of that appendix, it shows how to do it the long way, and it'll say take your gross income less your allowances. Well, so our taxable income was $1150 for this first person, and then we subtract out, it says the allowances per, if you're paid monthly, is $329.20 per allowance. So we're going to have to multiply that by 3 since we have 3 allowances. So we take our taxable wages minus the allowance part, and then I'm left with the $10,062. Now is where I go and find where that fits in. Where does $10,062 fit in for somebody who is married and paid monthly, and you'll find it's in that 25% bracket area. So then I just work from right to left, as we did last week. 10,062 minus the 6,854. That's telling me that of all of my wages, a little over 3,200 of it is taxed at that 25% bracket. So I multiply that out, I get $802, and then I add in what it tells me to add in last, which is $846.85. And when I sum it all up, I get that $1648 amount. Now notice for John. John makes just a little bit less than Lori does. So he's only going to be taxed at $10,400 when she was taxed at $11,000, which is over $11,000. However, John is single, and he has quite a few more allowances. He has 6 allowances. So let's see, even though he makes a little less, let's see how much federal withholding he has. And you'll see if you jump ahead, he actually is going to pay more in federal withholding because he's single than our Lori did as somebody who made even more money than he did taxable-wise. So go through the same steps, take the $10,400 as our starting taxable withholdings, and then subtract out the number of allowances that we are allowed. So the $329, that's our monthly allowance number, times the 6 that we have. So our federal withholdings after allowance is the $84.24. Look down to the 28% bracket, and it tells us, okay, take your taxable wages minus the $76.33. We got $791 left that's taxed at that high rate of 28%. So the $221 that's left over, when we calculate that, plus that last number that it gives us, the $1,515.95, when we add it up, we get the $1,737. So total federal withholdings for the month, $38.58. State withholdings, this is very easy if you just use the formula. Remember, state withholdings, they go along with your federal base numbers. So all I have to do is you look up here in the formula, take my federal taxable wages, times it by the 3.4% that I told you in the instructions, and it simply calculates it for us. City withholdings do the same thing, except use 1.3%. Still use our federal withholdings taxable wage base as the starting figure. Social Security, basically taking whatever's in this column, here, and multiplying it by 6.2%. So obviously Lori has nothing because she was over the cap. John has very little, since most of his was already at the cap except the last $800 worth. And then our final employee has the normal amount. Medicare, done the same way as the Social Security, taking this column times 1.45%. And then in the instructions, I tell us how much is taken out for each of the employees out of their check for the 401k and the medical. And I know you can't see this, but right now I'm looking back at the directions, and I'm remembering that the employer is going to match the 401k of the employee and pays twice what the employee does in medical. So that's going to come important when we get to the journal entries next. But for the employee only, I just take out what it tells us. And then for the net wages, I simply take my gross wage, how much I earned, the $11,800, and subtract out each one of my withholdings that gets taken out of my paycheck. So the $11,800 minus every one of these, leaves me with a paycheck here of $87.14. And just do that on down. I would highly, highly recommend that you do these formulas to avoid any adding errors. That's where formulas come in great. That's where they come in the most useful, I think, is by doing when you have these bigger adding and subtracting items. Okay, now we're ready to do the journal entry. So I'm going to go to my next tab where I have listed the journals. Remember, with payroll, you always have at least 2 journal entries. You have what the employee made minus what they had taken out of their check. That's the first journal entry. The second journal entry is the employer's additional taxes that they had to pay. And then the third and any other additional entries are other expenses that the employer pays on the employee's benefit. So the first one, our wage expense. Okay. There we go. We had a total wages of $28,200. That $28,200 came from our gross wages. That's how much our employees earned total, $28,200. Now I need to account for all of that money and where it went. Most of it's going to go to the employees as a paycheck, which is a good thing. The rest of it, all the totals, are now very easy to determine. I just look back at my payroll register. So how much was taken out in total for federal withholdings? $38.58. So I'm going to show that in my journal. Remember, I don't do a journal entry for each individual employee. I just do one large journal entry for everybody combined. So I'm going to take out the federal withholdings, the state withholdings, and make those all a payable account in the liabilities, because I need to pay that on to the government, or in this case the 401k and medical premiums to those respective companies. And then my final number, whether I'm paying them in cash at that moment or I'm going to pay them later as a wages payable, that $20,000 better equal your net pay. So whatever you had for the payroll register, which is $20,875, that better be what your final credit is in your journal. Then we move on to the employer's portion of the taxes that they have to pay. We've only talked about 2 of them. We're going to talk about the final 2 next week, which are FUTA and SUTA, the federal unemployment taxes and state unemployment. But right now, all we need to worry about are the 2 that we've done, the FICA taxes. And whenever the employee has taken out of their checks in total, the employer has to add to that fund and chip in another duplicate amount. And then we debit everything to our payroll tax expense. And then our final 2, I want to have a separate expense item that's going to tell me exactly how much money I put away into my employee's retirement account and how much I have put into their medical premium account. And this will also then tell me how much I owe the company when it's time to pay them, either on the weekly, monthly, quarterly basis. Now I have everything I need and I'm ready to start the Form 941. So I would have the 941 form pulled up, and I'll pull it up here in a little bit so you can see where I'm putting some of these final answers. But at the top, we can fill in that information. That's not hard. We get down to line 1. We have 3 employees. And then our next line, line 2, asks us what's our total federal withholdings for the quarter. Well, I already know what it is for this pay, and since I had it as a monthly pay, here's my federal withholdings. Actually, hold on. Line 2, let me go back. Line 2 says, oh, what were the wages? Getting ahead of myself. Line 3 is our federal holdings. Line 2 is our wages. What was our federal taxable wages? Notice that's federal, not gross. So when I get to line 2, all I'm going to simply do is if nobody in the company has changed, and I have the same people making the same money, all I simply got to do is look at what my federal withholding, federal taxable wages were, $27,680, and multiply that by 3. That's how much they made in December, and they would have made the same amounts in November and October, unless told otherwise. And I'm going to do now the same thing for line 3. If they had $38.58 and 60 cents taken out in December, they would have had the same amounts taken out in October and November unless told otherwise. So simply multiply that number by 3. Now, where it gets to be a little bit more difficult is when we get down to line 5 and looking at what's taxable for Social Security. We can determine from the wages that Lori is over the cap. So what I have done here, I got F5 plus K5. Let's go back up and show what I've done. So for FICA wages, this is how much total, when you combine these two, so $138,000, that's how much in total FICA wages she made. But we have to cap it at $118,500. So total out of everything that is shown for Lori, she went over the limit. If you look at her taxable Medicare wages or her FICA wages on the Medicare side, taxable amount, she would have had $138 Medicare-wise. But for Social Security-wise, she went over because the $118,500 is the limit. And how much is she over? She's over the $19,500. John, do the same thing. Add in his FICA wages plus his Medicare, and this is what he made without any caps. When you subtract out how much he's over with the Social Security cap, he's over by $9,900. So what I need to do is my total Medicare wages, that's the best place to start here. Just pretend there's no caps. So total Medicare wages would have been $82,890. But then when I take in that there was 2 caps involved, I need to take that top Medicare number and then subtract out the $19,500 that Lori was over and the $9,900 that John was over. And when I subtract that from the $82,890, I'm left with how much was actually taxable for Social Security, line 5A. And then simply take this line 5A times what they tell you on the sheet, times it by 0.124. That's the employee and the employer's portion double. Line 5C, the Medicare wages, simply taking what we started with, the $82,890. There is no caps, so all FICA wages are taxable. You can go through and add up all the remaining items that need to be added up on the Form 941. I'm not showing those here. You should be able to follow the directions on those. Let's now go to line 14 on the back side of Form 941. What I'm doing here for October, so this is all right, line 14 for October. Social Security and Medicare wages. Nobody hit the cap, so that's why I'm using this $27,630. Lori didn't even hit the cap at that point, and I'm showing that what I have done over here is shown, here's Lori after the 9th month. She has made $103,000. If you add in another $11,500, she still has not hit the cap. So I make a little chart down here for Lori and for John. After 10 months, so that's October, she has not hit the cap. At the 11th month, she has begun to hit the cap, and by the 12th month, she's way over. John, he hasn't hit the cap. He still hasn't hit the cap in the 11th month, but he finally does hit the cap in that 12th month. So that's why I have these guys in play here. So for Social Security, all of the Medicare wages are taxable as Social Security as well in October. So what I did is take the 27,630 times the 1.24, the 27,630 times the 2.9, and the 2.9 is the 1.45 plus the 1.45, employee and the employer match. And then the federal holdings aren't going to change. They still had 3858 back up from our payroll register. So I owed, the employer needed to make a payment for these taxes on the 941 of the $8,085. Now let's go to November. Notice November is a little lower for our wages. In October we had 27,000 taxable. Now we're just over 19,000 taxable. That's because of Lori has gone over the cap. So at the 11th month, that's what I put this over category here for, she has went over by $8,000. If you take what she had made, 126.5 minus the cap of 118.5, she's went over by 8,000. So I need to subtract 8,000 from this beginning Medicare number, and that's what I've done. And then do the same calculations as above. Notice the Medicare and the federal holdings don't change month to month. It's only the Social Security that'll change. Once we get to December, the Social Security will change again because now not only is Lori over, but also John is over. And for the December, I don't even have to calculate anything. All I had to do was go back up to my payroll register, see how much the employees had taken out total, 386. But remember, that's just the employee. So what I need to do is double that. And then the same for the Medicare. I need to double the 400 to show how much was taken out for both the employee and the employer total. So that's where I get the 772 and the 801. The 3858 remains the same. The employer doesn't match that, and nobody hits. There is no caps for federal holding. So now when I add up all 3 months, I get 20,612, which will match what my line 10 was above. And then I show, we'll now pull up the 941. Okay, noting here that we're in the 4th quarter, 3 employees, how much in taxable federal withholdings we had, taxable federal wages we had. And these were all calculated on my Excel sheet, and that's what I will want to see when I'm grading this. I want to see all of your work. Otherwise, you just don't get any points if you have something wrong. I can't give you partial credit. And then why the Social Security and the Medicare wages are so different, we showed that as well, because 2 of our employees went over the cap. And then taking when we add up our column 2, we get the 9,000, adding that into the 11,000 federal withholdings, we get the 20,612, which just happened to match the 3 months of liabilities, 20,612. Okay, with that, I hope you have a successful rest of the week 5, and I will be back for week 6 talking about the unemployment taxes.